that point, I had met a substantial amount of people that studied under the professor. I gathered something from each person that I studied from, and each person had a different emphasis in Taichi. So I thought about doing this after I went to Wolf Lowenthal's school. And that was because at that point I had met a substantial amount of people who had studied under the professor. So I gathered something from each person that I studied from. And each person had a different emphasis in Taichi. So first I'm kind of going to go through the list and talk to you about each person. And then we'll go through the list again in some way or another, but we'll experience, I'll really kind of ground it for you through experience, what they each focused on. I have tried over the years to not be someone who focuses on any one thing in particular. Although I don't know if I'm succeeding in that, because part of me really gravitates towards Tai Chi as a moving meditation, a meditation in motion, and how that actually occurs. And so in my study with my master's degree, a lot of what I put in there had to do with that relationship between mind and body. And so to a certain degree, maybe I'll fall a little bit short in not emphasizing anything in particular because they have been a part of my study to a large extent. When I first, I wrote this list up last night. And so these are the teachers that I studied with. Now, at first, I have Grandmaster William C.C. Cheng at the top of the list because he was my first teacher. And he still is my primary teacher, and I still stay connected with him. Then I put down Da Lu, but I thought Da Lu had studied with Professor Cheng and Ching, but Da Lu did not study from Professor Cheng and Ching. Da Lu came here to this country before the professor came here. And when the professor came, the professor stayed with Da Lu for a little while until he got on his own feet. So Da Lu taught in a cathedral in New York City. That was, I forget, some large cathedral, that's where he mostly taught. And I visited his school when I was studying from Grandmaster Cheng. Then I also put down Ben Lo and Dr. Dao. Now those are William Chen, Ben Lo, Dr. Dao, those are three people who studied from the professor when the professor was in China. And then Don An, he's someone who opened up a school on Spring Street in New York City. And he studied from the professor starting in 1964, I believe, in New York. Then there was Jane Baton Feigao, Ed Larriman, Maggie Newman, Patrick Chang, which is the professor's son, Tam Gibbs, Ed Young, and Wolf Lowenthal. And so all of these people were people connected with the professor when he came here to this country. So significant to me in terms of that list is that actually the professor had a different way of teaching and different emphasis when he was in China and Taiwan than he did when he came here to this country. And there's some interesting things that have shifted and changed based on his location. Also based on the period of time he was at in his life, things changed. For instance, when he developed the short form, part of developing the short form had to do with the fact that he was teaching military and did not have a chance to, well, didn't really have the time for them to learn the long form. Okay, so he changed the form up and made it into a short form. And when he did that, he eliminated the repetitive movements, basically. Now, when I studied at Grandmaster Chen's school, he taught us the long form and a short form. His short form was not exactly the same as Professor's because he had a different emphasis. And also, too, he wanted to distinguish himself from Professor by having his own unique form. Now, that's in a way that's not traditional, and in a way it is traditional. And actually going to the art show that we went to actually told me about how traditional it might be. The art show at the University of Michigan that we went to, we heard a lecture, or the docent talked about the artwork. And one of the things that she said was that the artists, they did imitate precisely the traditional styles of painting. Okay? And in imitating those styles traditionally, then they actually would express a little bit of something else. And so they would then develop off of those styles. But to learn those styles traditionally, the way they're supposed to be done, that was the method of learning. So that same method of learning is very much a part of my lineage. You study what the teacher taught, how the teacher taught it, and do it the way the teacher does it. And then maybe you might have an opportunity to expand on some of your understanding. Now, that expansion on your understanding actually should only occur if you have embodied the principles to a certain degree, a certain level. Because then you start making some stuff up that really doesn't fit into the energy flow of what it is that you are practicing. So of all of those people that I mentioned, Grandmaster Cheng was the most unique outside of the, in terms of how he developed some things outside of what the professor taught. All of the other people on that list stuck strictly to what professor taught. And that's what they, to this day, if they are still alive, are teaching. So when Professor changed the form, he went to Che Wei-ming. And Che Wei-ming said, when the professor asked him, how does this look? Che Wei-ming says, oh, looks okay. But again, that was like, you don't change what your teacher has taught you. So, you know, the professor did his thing too, you know, aside from Grandmaster Cheng doing his thing. He spent a good number of years not pushing when he did push hands with someone else. He did not push for, I think he said 3 years to me, that he didn't push anyone. And at the end of the 3 years, no one could push him. And so then it was his turn to start pushing. So since he knew how to neutralize, and in push hands, the principles state that the push comes out of neutralization, then he was able to push other people. So, as I mentioned, Grandmaster Cheng, he did application. He did body mechanics, and to this day, he still does mostly application and body mechanics. But of all of the teachers that I've studied with, his form is the most fluid, the softest. Yet, he, to this day, is very powerful in his martial application. In Grandmaster Chen's school, we studied form first. Then we went into what was called corrections at the time. But he really pushed you right into boxing. So I went from form to you know, corrections. And he had me working with beginners, and he had me reciting the breathing of the form as we went through the form at the beginning while he stayed in the office, and then he would come out of the office and teach us something. And then he put on the gloves on my hands, and he would say, go out there and beat him up. Okay. And push hands. And so that very active part of doing Tai Chi was a part of my upbringing. Hence, even this is a part of my upbringing. Most people who do Tai Chi, including Grandmaster Cheng, he doesn't wear this Chinese jacket unless he's doing a show, a demonstration, making a video or something of that sort. But when he teaches, he puts on a t-shirt, a belt, and some pants. From there, I went to Boulder, Colorado. And in Boulder, Colorado, that's where I met Jane and Baton Figao. And that's when I started to realize all of these other people who studied from Professor. And also started to realize that there were other perspectives around doing Tai Chi than what Grandmaster Cheng had. And how much of the internal aspect Professor really preferred his students focus on. Grandmaster Cheng was totally internal. And as people who had take a workshop from him, even though he doesn't talk about it very much, you can see it, you know, and he's just not one of those mental people in that way. He's mental in other ways. He's an engineer, but he's not mental in terms of that mind-body connection so to speak. So when I started studying at Naropa Institute, which is where Jane and Baton Feigao were teaching at, that's when I came across Maggie Newman, Tam Gibbs, Ed Young, Fred Larriman, and Patrick Cheng. So I went back to New York, and while I was in New York, I also went to Da Nang School. And Da Nang was someone who studied with a professor here in the United States. And Da Nang had his own perspective about what the professor was teaching and about Tai Chi. And mostly, it really had so much to do with the back and the flexibility of the back. And ironically, when I would go to Grandmaster Chen's classes, Grandmaster Cheng started talking to me about my flexibility in my back, that I needed to have more flexibility in my back. So and I'll demonstrate that for you in a little while. He talked about walking. And when you walk, how you don't walk with a stiff back. There's this natural flexibility of the spine that happens. And so I started to understand where that was in the form. Fred Larriman was the first person outside of Jane and Baton that I actually touched base with. And he taught the 8 ways to us, just really briefly. Didn't know a whole much about those 8 ways, but it was something that Professor Cheng had developed. And there were 8 images and 8 movements. And they were used to help people understand Tai Chi, as well as how to work with the basic principles without necessarily doing the Tai Chi form. People who maybe had been in bed because they were older, or had been in some type of operation or something of that sort, and they're trying to get their physical faculties back together. He used these to help them get back in their bodies in a very fundamentally whole way. After Fred, then there was Maggie Newman. And Maggie Newman, she was really interested in the intricacy of movement. She taught about how to stay relaxed in between the postures. So that started to really vibrate with me in terms of getting to the impulse of tension. And so, and she also was a Buddhist. So some of that meditative aspect of doing Tai Chi started to come into play. Tam Gibbs, after her, was into the dynamics of motion, moving like a great river. As well, he was very, very clear about being aware, total body awareness. So that if you were in a posture like Golden Pheasant stands on left foot, the hand that is at your side was not just hanging there. It was in a weighing tendency posture. He would yell at us. He'd say, "What is that hand doing? What is it doing? It looks like it's doing nothing. It should be doing something. You should have some awareness in that hand." And so he was very keen on that. The other thing that Tam really brought into the picture for me was in sword form. My sword form today resembles a lot of Tam Gibbs' sword form, because he was very strict with sword. He made us take care of that sword like it was a part of ourselves. We had to sleep with our swords. We had to know where those edges were at all times. We had to make it a part of our body, so that when you have that in your hand as a weapon, it is an extension of your being, as opposed to just this piece of wood. And this is very poignantly and noticeable when you get around people who have studied sword form who don't have that awareness, because their sword is like in their hand, they're talking, they're swinging around, you're kind of like going, whoa, whoa. It's sort of like someone who has a gun in their hand, and even though the safety might be on, they're going like this with the gun, and you're like, wait a minute. You don't point it at someone. So it was, I didn't realize how much he was giving us at that time until I got around other people who were totally unconscious of what they were doing when they had that sword in their hand. Tam studied Chinese so that he could communicate with the professor. But Tam also studied other martial arts. And so Tam also made sure that we understood some of the dynamic motion in the form that was had martial application. It was different than what Grandmaster Chen did. Grandmaster Chen was about fighting and application. Tam was about dynamics of motion and application. So he trained energy in the muscle more than trained the muscle in fighting. Patrick Cheng, Professor's son. His father made him get up in the morning and go out there in the morning with him to practice. And he was a kid, so he hated Tai Chi. And so that kind of discipline with Tai Chi, where it becomes a chore, was very obvious to me. And that's when I started to kind of think about Tai Chi and find, a little bit more of the enjoyment about doing Tai Chi instead of sort of like the seriousness of, I'm doing this Tai Chi thing. Because that's a sort of a level of tension as well, So once he said that, I started to think about that quite deeply. Ed Young, he was about the Tao in Tai Chi. He had that presence about him. He would ride his bike in wearing shorts, sneakers, and white socks, and teach the class. And then after class, we would go someplace else, or we would stay there, and he would read from the things that he translated that the professor talked about, the 13 treatises that he talked about, his lectures or whatever that he had written down. And then he would wait until the last question was asked, and then he would get on his bicycle and ride off into the sunset, so to speak. So, it was just about being, and really embodying the philosophy with him. The thing that I gathered from Wolf Lowenthal, even though I was only there for a couple of his classes, I've become very skilled at looking at how a person is in their body and listening to what it is that they say and seeing what it is that they happen to be emphasizing. And the thing that Wolf Lowenthal was emphasizing in his way, in his body, was this deep relaxation, total relaxation. That's what my body picked up from him. I could feel myself when I was on my flight home, breathing and kind of really going into this state of deep relaxation. And the professor always talked about you have to relax. You have to deeply relax. You have to believe in relaxation in order to really benefit from the form. And Ben Lo was all about the root. All about the root. And his saying was, my name is Ben Low, not Ben High. So that meant you had to stay low. And if you were holding a stance, he could be talking to people. He'd tell you, don't stand up. There's 50 people in the room. He eventually gets around to you, and he pushes you on that hip, in that fold area. Pushes in on that so that you had to release more and really let your weight drop down to your feet. It would burn. It would feel like you were going to, and you want to stand up, and you try and stand up, and he'd keep his finger there. He says, don't stand up. And he was like, no pain, no gain. Each person emphasized it in their own way. And it becomes distorted to a certain degree when you pull out these pieces of information and that's all that you are going to focus on and emphasize. Sometimes it's a matter of what you yourself need to learn in life in general. Well, those are all the different people that I've actually touched base with and learned something from. And what I've tried to do as much as possible is not emphasize anything in particular. But I really wanted to understand Tai Chi from the body perspective, from the mind perspective, and from the spirit perspective. Because it is an integration of mind, body, and spirit. So part of understanding it from the mind perspective was also me studying with Trungpa Rinpoche, was also me studying with Jia Fu Feng, Taoist meditation, Buddhist meditation. It was also part of me studying transpersonal psychology, and me also studying something about the five-element theory and understanding the meridian system and the health aspect of traditional Chinese medicine. Because the professor in one of his writings somewhere along the line in an article said, if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand Tai Chi. And I took that to heart. So I've integrated all of these things in my teaching, in my practice as well.